What? What? What?
Science! Hey everyone, welcome to the Social Media Lab Live. I am Scott Ayers, the content scientist here at the Social Media Lab, where we bust the myths, the rumors, and the stories of social media marketing with science. Now, I've got a quick question for you. Raise your hand if you've ever gotten a negative comment on your social media post. Now, I'm waiting. Now everybody in the room probably thinks you're weird, but it's probably just your cat that's watching, because like most people, you're probably at home watching this. But yeah, most of us have gotten some sort of negative comments on our social media posts, whether it's on Facebook, it's on Twitter, it's on LinkedIn, Instagram, even Google Plus back in the old days. And how you handle those negative comments online is crucial to your business's success. And without some sort of plan, you're going to fail, or at minimum, look like, a complete idiot. And so today, I'm joined by an expert in this topic, and we're going to talk about what he has called his swarm methodology. I can never say that word. Methodology of how he handles negative comments and how he recommends that you handle negative comments. So we're doing a couple of interesting things today. As you know, in the lab, I'm always testing something. And if you haven't, read our latest test, we actually published a new blog post yesterday. It's an Owen video interview I did about how to start a YouTube account. Make sure you run over to agorapulselab.com. But I'm trying something today, which is going to be kind of interesting. Normally, I'll go live just on the Agora Pulse page on Facebook, plus Twitter, LinkedIn and YouTube, and even Twitch. I go live on Twitch. And then I'll do watch parties in the Social Media Lab group, on Social Media Lab Facebook page, and other places. It's a little bit hard to do watch parties right now on a live show. It used to be you could just do it straight from the video. Now with the new layout, I can't. I can only do it to my profile. Otherwise, I have to go to the group, or I have to go to the page and then do it. And it's kind of a hard thing. But I'm using Restream, and Restream allows me to go live in a whole bunch of places. So right now, I'm actually live on, I don't even know, I forget the number now, 4 or 5 Facebook pages. I'm live in our group. I'm live in all those other channels that I mentioned all at the same time. So hopefully, if you leave a comment, I should be able to see it and respond to it. The group is the only one I'm not certain on if your comment will come through. So I'm kind of monitoring that off over here to the side. So we'll kind of play around with that and see. And if you haven't tried out Restream yet, I would encourage you to do it. Restreamlive.com is where you can grab your not free, but you can get started, and you can get $10 off when you sign up. And here's the cool thing about Restream. The fact that, for one, I could just use their live studio like I am right now. So it's kind of the back end live studio. Or you could use, something like OBS or Ecamm, and then use Restream to send it out to wherever you want to send it out. I'm using the live studio because I'm not that smart yet to use Ecamm and some of those other stuff. So I use their live studio, and I do everything kind of in their back end. So on the cloud, doesn't require anything on my computer. And I'm really digging it. And they're doing some cool stuff right now, like they're giving us free backgrounds. They're giving us free timers. Like you saw the timer in the beginning that I had, but now there's all kinds of timers that they're giving us for free, different overlays. I can change participant names. I can do all kinds of cool stuff in the back end of it. And so I'm really loving it. So make sure you run over to restreamlive.com if you want to grab your access to it and start playing around with it. I'm going to see what somebody's commented. Rebecca Ward. Hello, Rebecca. Good to see you. Patricia from the Netherlands. Very cool. Good to have you in here. Luke is clapping. I don't know where he's at, but he's clapping. Rebecca says, I'm not sure I have personally. So you haven't got negative comments? Wow, that's surprising. That's because you're just so awesome, Rebecca. No one would ever leave a negative comment, perhaps, on your social media. And Deb is here. Deb is our community manager. So if you notice Deb, especially if you're on the main Agora Pulse Facebook page, Deb always puts a lot of stuff in the comments, kind of the cliff notes of our live show. And I didn't even give her the notes for this week because I forgot to write them until like 10 minutes before we got started. So she'll kind of be all over that. And I do want to kind of ask you this. We always have a question of the day. And this week I asked a negative thing, but I want an easy. I'm gonna give you an easy one. What'd you have for breakfast? What is your breakfast habit? Are you coffee? Are you coffee and a bagel and toast? Are you eggs? I'm 3 scrambled eggs every morning, and I've done that for years. I make myself 3 scrambled eggs, and sometimes my wife as well, and eat 3 scrambled eggs every morning. So I'm curious. Let me know in the comments what you had for breakfast this morning. We'll have a little fun with that as we get started. And I do want to mention Agora Pulse. We are a part of Agora Pulse. Hopefully you knew that. If you didn't, then shame on me for not letting you know that. But Agora Pulse is, a platform that lets you manage all your social media, lets you do a lot of cool, fun stuff with it. If you got a team, it really comes into handy. But don't take my word for it. I want you to listen to somebody you probably recognize and what he has to say about Agora Pulse.
Hey friends, this is Jay Baer, founder of Convince and Convert, and I want to take just a minute to tell you why I love Agora Pulse. Now look, there's a ton of social media management tools out there, but Agora Pulse has some really special features that my team and I really, really appreciate. I want to tell you about those. Now first, the mobile app for Agora Pulse is really, really solid. I travel like 200 days a year, so the ability to check all of my social media accounts from an airport or wherever else I happen to be is a huge plus. Also, you have the ability to moderate YouTube from within Agora Pulse. That's really handy too if you do a lot of videos, and you can oversee both paid and social media programs in the same place and at the same time. The team at Agora Pulse is also super to work with. They're really responsive. They're a great, great group. It's high-powered, yet it's also affordable, and that's a combination I can get behind. If you haven't used Agora Pulse yet, check it out.
So I think most of you know who Jay Baer is. I've got the wig. He's got the cool jackets and the cool suits. So make sure you run over to agorapulse.com/live. I put the link in the comments so you can kind of go run over there and grab your free trial, kick the tires, see what you think about it. Let's see. Yvonne, she has coffee, still need to eat something. Well, you're in California, so I guess that's understandable. Gregory had a soda. What kind of soda? I'm really curious. Evie, Agora Pulse for the win. I appreciate that. Rebecca, always toast and tea. Hey, I'm literally scrambled eggs with some salt on it every morning. That's exactly what I eat every single day. No coffee for Deb. So here's what we're gonna bring on our guest. And like I said, I'm doing Restream, and sometimes it's like to do producing and also watch the comments and then get the camera and all that. I look down, so excuse me for looking down. So I'm gonna bring Todd on real quick. And if you don't know who Todd is, Todd Maffin is the president of Engage Q Digital, a social engagement agency that helps brands such as, these are big ones too, Grey Cup, Mountain Equipment Co-op, Pacific Coastal Airlines, Abbott Pharmaceutical, OK Tire, and a whole lot more. Now I could probably go on and on about what Todd does, but Todd, welcome to the show. And kind of, if somebody doesn't know who you are, kind of maybe give us like your 30 to 60 second elevator pitch so we kind of know and have some premise to what we're going to talk about.
Sure. Hi. Thanks for having me on. I've of course been a huge fan of the work that you do at the lab. I married a scientist, so that's always in the back of my head. Been in digital marketing for almost 30 years now, since pretty much the beginning. I started coding HTML by hand for corporations' Netscape pages, and have been at it ever since. Spent some time as a national technology columnist for Canada's public broadcaster, which we call CBC, which is kind of like NPR, but with a lot less money. And since then, I've been running the agency, as you mentioned, and I do a daily podcast for digital marketers called Today in Digital Marketing.
And no one to talk about. So daily podcast. Now, how do you do that? How do you actually, have you ever missed a day? And how many episodes have you done so far?
I took one day off during right when the lockdown started to happen.
Okay.
I took a day off for that. I've been on holidays, and we've got a good team here. I do it because the team handles most of the client work, and that lets me kind of get away with playing, which I like to do on the podcast and have fun with it. I still have 2 or 3, maybe 3 or 4 hours with client stuff, mostly kind of just doing strategic work and mapping out planning and that sort of thing. But I certainly have a lot of fun with the podcast. But yeah, it's a lot. I think we just crossed 250 episodes. We've been doing it for a year now, and it's been steadily
so
growing.
Like weekends too, or just Monday through Friday? What?
No, it's just Monday to Friday. Every once in a while, I'll throw in like an extended weekend edition if there's like sort of an expert that I want to talk to. But it's not like other podcasts where it's where it's sort of an in depth with one person. This is a newscast. It's 8 minutes long. The idea is that every day is just part of your cycle, and it catches you up on everything in SEO and Facebook ads and Google ads, everything you missed that day.
Yeah, and I was on that podcast here recently, so I don't know how me talking in less than 8 minutes is, that's hard.
Well, we clipped you, and then you became an extended edition because you had so much good stuff to talk about.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to do, but that's very cool. I've always thought I tried doing the daily podcast for a while, but then it's so hard once you miss a few, your guilt kind of comes in, and you're like, oh no, I missed, and then you forget to get back over to it. So kudos to you for doing so many podcasts in a row. We had Travis from Poddex on the show last week talking all about how to get started in podcasting. So
that's great.
Cool to see you succeed in that. So we're going to talk about negative comments and how you come up with this thing called Swarm. Now here's something. It's called the Swarm methodology, and here's another cool thing. And I'm playing around with Restream as we go. I uploaded this. I can change the background to our bees. I pulled that off your website. So like that's some of the kind of stuff you can do with Restream. But yeah, I love the bee thing, the bee analogy. So kind of if we're talking about Swarm thing, how did you come up with this? What was the idea? Where did you get started? And why did you feel like you had to come up with a way to deal with negative comments on social?
This started from a podcast that I did a long, long time ago. I was one of the first podcasters in the world. I think I had the 11th podcast in history. If you go back to Steve Jobs up on stage introducing iTunes 4.7, which is when they launched their version of podcasting, I'm like in the iTunes list on the stage behind him is in the top 10, only in the top 10 because there were only like 12 or 13 podcasts at the time. Right. And that was for a podcast I did called the How to Do Stuff podcast. And the idea behind it was I would just interview normal people about stuff that they did that I personally found interesting. One of the ones that I did was I did an episode on how to get upgraded on Air Canada without any certificates. Back in the day, they would mail you certificates based on how much you traveled, then you'd use it to upgrade. Long story short, it was not quite an ethical procedure. You basically had to kind of lie that you had one and then show up on a full flight and claim you couldn't find it. So it was a little sleazy, I'll grant you. But for the first 2 or 3 weeks when the podcast episode went up, nothing happened. It was just fine. Right. And then all of a sudden, this swarm of angry commenters started attacking. And so how I chose to respond eventually informed the model that we use at EngageQ right now. We handle the engagement and moderation, as you mentioned, for some fairly big brands, government agencies, shopping centers, and so on. And so, we had to develop a consistent way of handling those kinds of things when they happen. Negative reviews, bad comments, and so on. And so Swarm ended up coming from that.
Yeah, I liked it. Now there's a hard, you said a swarm of negative comments came in. So do you originally automatically just start thinking, I got to wait, I can make something fun out of this? And
no, it was very stressful when it was happening. I didn't have that many listeners. There weren't that many podcast listeners. Podcasts weren't really a thing in terms of, the world experience. So no, it was fairly stressful. But, the thing that sort of cemented it for me for it being a swarm was that I was able to find where they all gathered. And what it turns out is that someone had written an article on this board called Flyer Talk, which is like one of those forums. And so, if you consider that kind of the hive, right, that's where the swarm started. And you could ask the swarm, like, if you're all of a sudden attacked, like, where, you don't want to say where's your hive because they're not going to understand the metaphor, but you could say, like, where did you all come from? And so, once I found the hive of where the swarm was coming from, then I was able to sort of read what they had seen and develop something from there.
So what's the downside of for one, maybe negative comments, and two, not handling them correctly?
Well, there's two primary issues. One is algorithmic, and the other is from a brand point of view. The algorithmic impact on you is substantial, depending on the different channels that you're talking about. But we'll use Facebook, Instagram as a primary channel. When you have negative comments, there's a category of artificial intelligence called semantic intelligence, or it's basically where they're trying to understand the language. They're trying to understand what the words mean. And so when there are a series of negative comments in a row, or when it perceives that a particular post has gotten negative, even if you're not getting what Facebook calls a negative report, right, which is hide, spam, those sorts of things, it still understands the language that's being used in there. Now, language evolves from time to time, so it's not perfect. The example I like to use is the word sick. So, if it's a young person talking about these running shoes are sick, that's positive. If you're a restaurant and it's a 45-year-old woman who says, I got sick, that's same word, completely different context. So, the algorithms aren't perfect, but algorithmically speaking, that's one very negative benefit. And that impacts your reach, that impacts your price of the ad market, it impacts all sorts of stuff. I see Luke Elliott in here. Luke and John Loomer, both incredible brains in that space. If you have a chance to get to John Loomer's Power Hitters Club, really solid information. Luke's in there all the time, and he can walk you through that. The other issue in terms of the negative aspect, as I mentioned, is brand. You just want to impact your brand. And if your brand, which I always perceive a brand to be a promise that you give consumers, if your promise is that you're going to handle things and then the comments end up being negative, then you've broken that brand trust.
Yeah, and we found it was an interesting thing. I didn't even discuss this with you beforehand, but we did a test on the impact of negative comments on ads on Facebook. What happened, that sentiment? So we ran a test of the first ad had a bunch of positive, fluffy comments that we added, or we had people go and add. We ran the identical ad again to a different audience a little bit later and added negative stuff like, you suck, you guys are awful, blah, blah, blah. And for one, the engagement was much less. The reactions were awful. We got a lot more negative reactions from other people. And then the click-through rate was something like 25, 30% lower when we had negative comments just left on our posts that we weren't even addressing. We just let them sit there. So it's kind of an interesting thing that people, like Rebecca is saying here, she finds that people get braver and leave more negative comments now a lot quicker. There's that hive swarm mentality, like a couple of negative comments. Oh, it's okay for me to go leave a negative comment. And we saw that on that test.
The other issue as well with the algorithm is that it refeeds itself. So if it begins to see a bunch of negative comments, it will show those comments to people in your social graph, to your friends. So then they'll see the negative comments, they'll jump into it as well. And it's kind of a unique thing to Facebook. It doesn't really happen on Instagram or LinkedIn or Twitter. The mechanics are different, but it's a problem.
Well, let's dive in. If you're just hopping over and watching, we're talking to Todd about his swarm methodology. I finally got the word right, on how to handle negative comments. And this is going to be probably the easiest, what I call ROS, or run a show for me, because we're just going to go through. Swarm actually stands for something. And so we're just going to walk through each one of them with Todd to kind of let you explain them to everybody as much as you want. So the S stands for speak like a human. So what does that mean?
Sure. And I should say, just before we get into that very briefly, these are indeed 5 steps. And in fact, these can be run as 5 sentences. So as you're listening to these 5, you can actually go through them sentence by sentence, a sentence for S, a sentence for W. And if you hit all 5, the goal of this is not just to quiet down negative comments, but to convert those, we call them enemy combatants here at the company, but convert those people into brand advocates for you. So the goal is not just to shut them up, it's not just to quiet down the issue, it's to go one step further and to turn them into advocates. So speak like a human. When people go onto social media, they want to complain about something. It's because they want to be heard and they feel attacked or insulted or affected personally, and they want some change to happen. And so that's a person having that conversation. So you, as the brand representative, should also let them see that there's a person behind it. Too often we use we and us as a way of kind of shielding ourselves from it. I'll give you a really good example. One of our clients is a major recycling program administered by a government. And they frequently will get negative comments in there about, how come the recycling fee is only 20 cents and it should be 30 cents and stuff like that. And so or a better example is, I didn't get the credit when I returned it. I didn't get what I should have gotten. So our goal then is to try to connect with them as a human being. So one way you do that is I statements, me statements. So the first things out of our mouth is, I'm so sorry to hear that. By the way, we have tested I'm sorry and I'm so sorry And we have found that "I'm so sorry" resonates stronger. Don't know why. It's probably just because it's not used that much. It has more emotion. So we almost always go with that. And then, let me see if I can fix that. So, you don't want to use language that's too corporate. One word that we would frequently use is "yikes." If you want to use a word that a human being would be, "Yikes! I'm so sorry to hear this happen." This isn't this isn't what we strive for. So language is very important. The only caveat to this is when you're picking things like "yikes" and so on. When we first get started with a client, we have a brand briefing. Most of that, there's all sorts of stuff, like who's your contact and so on. But a lot of that meeting, in fact, most of it is around the voice and tone of the brand. So, some brands would use "yikes" and some wouldn't. We work with shopping centers. One shopping center, Kildonan Place in Winnipeg, blue collar, young families. That's very different language than another shopping center we work with, Oak Ridge Center in Vancouver, where the primary audience is older Asian ladies. Very different tones.
Right. That's interesting. So just the whole, that's, and you would think "speak like a human" would make common sense, but I think people like you have some examples, and I'll post a link to it later of the whole method written out. But sometimes we tend to talk corporate talk and talk to like a robot to people, and don't really just have a one-on-one fun conversation with them and kind of turn it around. So
the fact that you're speaking like a human immediately disarms people.
I think so too. Yeah. And don't get defensive. So I think that's part of it as well, is as soon as you get defensive, it's like, man, people get all bent out of shape. So the first thing in the SWARM methodology is speak like a human. Anything else you want to talk about on that one?
I think that's it. I think that covers it. You'll post a link to to the actual article.
Yeah.
There's some specific examples in there of how we would structure that particular section. But yeah, I think that covers most of it.
All right. So the second obviously would be, and I got to find the W, the W, win-win. Now this one doesn't really say much yet to me, so I kind of know where you're probably going to go to. But what does win-win mean when we're talking about dealing with negative comments?
When people complain about something on social media, it is because they want some action to occur other than "you've been heard." So a really good example of this is when you, I'm gonna pick on Air Canada because I'm in Canada and they're terrible at customer relations. And so, when you write to them, you'll get this kind of generic saying "thank you for your feedback" kind of thing. But I don't have any expectation, nor am I being told that any action has happened. So part of the SWARM methodology is giving that person a win. And what I mean by a win is some action that has occurred as a result of their comment. That action, here's the dirty little secret, can be almost anything, right? So here's an example. Imagine that you own a restaurant, and for whatever reason, the building you're in is a heritage building, and it's not accessible to people with mobility issues, for people in wheelchairs. So someone in a wheelchair comes along and says, "I really wanted to use your restaurant today, but everyone, there's no way for me to get in." So one of the things that you can do is you can try to aim for a win. Actually, let me use a better example, is that you have an elevator, but it's people that are perfectly able-bodied who are taking that, right? Instead of them taking the stairs. And so they jam it up so that there's no room for a person with a wheelchair. So in that case, what do? What's the win? Well, if you're a restaurant, you wouldn't want to do this, but one win could be give her free meals for a year. That's a terrible win to give them because it impacts you negatively from a profit point of view.
Right.
So what does she want? She doesn't actually want free meals. She wants some action to occur based on her feedback. So that action can be as simple as, and again, me statements, "thank you for this. I'm going to raise this with our operations manager first thing Monday morning." Or "I'm going to walk this in to our executive director right now." Some action has been taken. So if you're listening closely to the language, that's a step beyond "thank you for the feedback" or "we'll look into it." It's a little bit beyond. It's "here's how I'm going to look into it. I'm going to raise this with the marketing meeting first thing tomorrow. I have placed this on the agenda for our operations call next week. Thank you for letting us know about this," right? So some action. And so that's why it's a win and a win. They get a win. They get some actual action that has occurred as a result of their feedback beyond just the usual blow off, "thank you for your feedback." And you get a win because you are now beginning to move them down the line toward brand advocacy.
Yeah, and at that win, I think it's funny because you talk about restaurant, and I used to run some restaurants, some pizza buffet
Mhm.
places. So the first when something bad happened, they'll say they got a bad pizza. We initially just want to go, okay, well here's a free coupon. Maybe it makes them feel okay in the first, but it didn't solve the problem, and it's a
That's
lot
right.
for me. I'm losing money, so I like your idea of the win-win. Like it didn't cost him any money to go email somebody about and you have a great picture on the website of a negative comment relating to the wheelchair and the elevator. And
The
so,
woman in that photo is my wife, by the
yeah,
way,
I know.
who legitimately is paraplegic.
Yeah. But I think the idea of, okay, yeah, we're sorry, we're going to fix this and then you're going to follow up, I'm sure later on. Here's what we did. Please come back. Those sort of things are going to have to come into play, but it's a win-win because then if you get them back, they're a paying customer and they're a loyal fan and they love you. And so
That's right.
just a free coupon, they're going to lose it in the car or they're still going to write negatively about you somewhere else on social. They might say, hey, they gave me a free meal. Cool. But that doesn't really help you out in the long run, in my opinion, anyway.
Yeah, and just to give you an example, this is in the blog post, but one of we work with a lot of shopping centers. There's one shopping center on the west coast of Canada, which had those kiosks in the malls, and they sell things like skin creams and things like that. There's one guy that was selling skin cream. What he was doing was he was very aggressive. He was, as women would pass by his thing, he would grab their hand and, like, without their permission, slather this skin cream on them. So you'll see this in the blog post. We just got flooded with complaints about this because, again, the Facebook algorithm picked up and started showing the complaints to more people. So if you look you'll see the responses that we used in there. If you look in and there's the link that you just posted. We're not actually saying we're going to kick him out or we're going to, remove him or anything. The only action that we took there was I'm going to address this with our operations manager tomorrow. That was it. And that worked just because it was some action. In the end, they eventually did kick him out, but the action that was taken was that.
Right. All right. So let's move on to A, and this may answer. Someone asked a question I wasn't going to ask you, but I think we maybe can address it during this one. Avoid a public fight when it comes to negative comments. What's some advice there? This one to me is common sense, but I especially see this in local businesses really bad where they'll argue with somebody. I'm like, stop it. So what's your advice here on avoiding a public fight?
So we have two rules of thumb at EngageQ. First is you will never win tit for tat. If you're going back and forth, you as the brand will lose 100%. You will always lose in that instance. So you just don't ever really want to get into it. The other rule of thumb that we use is what we internally call they've had their say, we've had our say. Right? So they've complained about something. You may not necessarily get resolution. They may not accept the win that you're offering them. They may still be angry, but you don't want to keep going back and forth in the public space. Right. They've had their say. You've had your say. Do not let them draw you in to a tit for tat. Well, you said the wheelchair ramp would be available next week. No, we didn't. We said this week. No, I have it right here. Well, you're reading it wrong. It just goes on forever, right? So you have your say, they have their say. If you need to follow up, you do that offline. You move them offline. Some tools like Agora Pulse is great at this kind of stuff, right? Where you can take the chat on Twitter, for instance, and just direct them into a Twitter DM. Right. Very simple to do on Facebook. So use the powerful tools that are in platforms like Agora Pulse to be able to move that stuff along. And so we would say, I'm so sorry that happened. So if you're watching the SWA so far, so thank you for letting me know about this. I'm so sorry that happened. I'm going to address this first thing tomorrow morning with our marketing team. If you have anything else you'd like to add, sorry, I don't mean that to be the middle finger. I'll use this one. If you have anything else you want to add to this, or if there's anything else we should know, please PM me, or please DM this account, or please email me. Here's my email address, right? We want to take that tit for tat and move it offline, because here's the issue. The algorithms, as I mentioned, Facebook especially, will amplify tit for tat because Facebook sees discussion happening. Yeah. And it's like, oh, this is great. It looks like there's some constructive stuff happening. So I'm going to show it to even more people, which you don't want necessarily to have out there.
Yeah, and I think your interesting analogy on this on the blog post is, when bees see, one bee attacking something, then other bees start to see it and they start to swarm in, and it becomes this huge fight. So if you got, Susie over here, arguing with your brand, well, Susie's friends start to see it. They're going to take Susie's side,
Hmm.
and it's just, they're going to start, oh yeah, you know what? That happened to me too. Or here's what happened when I went there. Then you're in this firestorm. You can't get the bees off your head. And so
Always remember the two rules. You will never win a tit for tat. Ever, 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 ever. You'll simply never win it. And move that discussion offline.
now, what about, like, you see this sometimes with big brands, who get away with being snarky, and someone leaves a negative comment and they'll just snark back. Like, I think of Wendy's all the time, because
Yes.
Wendy's is so famous for it. They don't really care. It didn't seem like, how do they get away with it, maybe, where other people don't?
Yeah, so those are kind of a category unto their own. I would call them troll for marketing purposes. They're not really trolling people. It's a marketing ploy, right? I mean,
Right.
people who tweet, I think I've done it too, actually. People who go in and tweet, hey, Wendy's roast me, know what they're getting into, because the whole point of that account is to be roasted. That's different than, like, you wouldn't expect, would be a good example. You wouldn't expect Southwest Airlines to respond in that way. You wouldn't expect Nordstrom to respond in that way. If they did, the corporate manager should be fired. But again, it comes down to the brand. We have a lot more. One of the companies that we work with that you mentioned off the top is the Grey Cup. That's the Super Bowl of Canada, right? It's the national football championship. So we've worked with them, and we work with the Vancouver Sun Run, which is the largest road race in the country, the largest, like, marathon type thing. So they're very different brands, right? So the Vancouver Sun Run, 50,000 runners in there. We're getting a lot of stuff for us to moderate, and they expect a kind of a professional, clean, family run kind of a voice. The Grey Cup, a little bit more jockey, a little bit more poking fun, a little bit more edgy. It's football, a little bit more room to grow in there. So
Right.
you have different voices that you want to use, but unless you are a troll for marketing account, don't do what Wendy's is doing.
Yeah, I don't think you can get away with it. Luke asking, and this is where maybe this ties in here. Do you have a point of view of when to just hide or delete, some sort of negative comment? Is there ever a place, if we're wanting to take it private, is there a point where you just got to delete it and get it off of your account? And does that make you look worse, or what do you think?
Sure. Yeah, so the flow charts that we use with clients are actually 4 axes, 4 quadrants: hide, delete, escalate, and ban. They all have their kind of different purposes. We rarely deploy the bottom 3. The issue with deleting and banning is that the person can see that you've deleted them and can tell that they've been banned, and that just causes a whole other mess of problems as well. Hiding is something that we will employ if it contains information that may mislead people, that we can't specifically combat. So those are really case-by-case basis. It depends on the individual client. But remember that hides can be detected by the person.
Exactly.
Hiding, just in case you're aware, and we're talking specifically about Facebook in this case, is that's Twitter has its own hide replies function. Although, can I just say, Twitter's hide replies function, which is just been launched in the last few months, hilariously now, when there's a tweet where the replies have been hidden,
Right.
it pops up this giant window that's
I
like,
didn't know that.
tweets have been hidden. You can find them at this button. And it's like, it's the last thing you need if you're trying to hide.
Oh no,
Anyway.
I didn't know
But
that.
Facebook's hiding is different than I think most people realize. When you hide a tweet, a comment on Facebook, that comment is still visible to the commenter, so
Yeah,
they
I didn't know
think that it's still there, and all of the commenters' Facebook friends as well. So
Right.
you're not hiding it for everyone. You're only hiding it from people outside of their social graph. So you have to kind of know going in whether or not, would it pick up there. So it limits the spread, but doesn't restrict the spread.
Yeah, and the thing that I ran into when we did that test on the ads too was like, and you'll see an ad, and especially on ads, I see this more than anything. It'll say 75 comments. You're like, oh, this must be either something controversial on here or it's a cool product. And then you go to read the comments and there's like 2.
Yes.
Because Facebook is still showing it. There's a lot of comments, but yeah, they hit a whole bunch of them. And for me as a marketer, I know immediately what's happened.
Yeah.
Someone has complained or argued, and someone's going in there and hiding all of it. So, I mean, for us, we ran our test on the ad anyway. We just found that just deleting them was easier because it didn't give that weird negative sentiment when people went over to it. But on something like this, it's a public post, and generally maybe you just hide it. But you just got to know that other people know something's up.
Well, and one thing just to be aware of, in case you are doing that for your own brand and you see like 75 comments, but only like 10 are showing, there is one instance where it may not be deleted comments, and that is when people just simply tag a person and that's it. So the default sort for Facebook comments is something that they call most relevant. And what that really means is they're going to filter out stuff that it thinks isn't really a comment that people would want to read. Almost all of those are when people just tag a friend in the comments to bring them over. In the default most relevant sort, those don't appear. So you may see only 4 comments when it's showing 30 comments, in which case 27 of them are but if you just go to all comments or newest comments, if you just change that sort, and indeed it's still fewer than it's showing, then in that case, there's been some deleting or hiding happening.
Very cool. All right. So we've gotten through SWA of the swarm. Now we're going to move on to the R, right, the wrongs. Tell us about this one.
Every once in a while, someone will be right. Someone will be correct in terms of what they need to do. Sometimes when they're complaining about something, it may be an issue that they've gotten wrong. So we'll go back to the example of the woman with the wheelchair who posts something on the example that we use in the blog post is, I use a wheelchair. I tried getting into your restaurant on Friday. Your elevator was packed with people who are perfectly capable of taking the stairs. Plus, it's out of order half the time. #fail. So first of all, #fail makes me concerned. She's posted that on Facebook. The fact that she's put a hashtag in there makes me concerned that maybe she's cross-posted this to Twitter or Instagram or another more pro hashtag platform. But she's made a statement in here that says, plus the elevator is out of order half the time. If you know that that's not factually correct, you need to correct that. Because other people in her community, in her social graph, right? Remember that this person's social graph, she uses a wheelchair for mobility. It's very likely that she has friends who also are in that community. And so if they come along and they then see, oh, there you go, perfect. If they come along and they then see, oh, wait a minute, this woman is reporting that the elevator's out of order half the time, and the restaurant has not corrected that, then it's on the record and people will believe that. So you still need to politely correct issues like that. So, and you use the same sort of feedback. You use like a human being. You would say, depending on the brand, we might try to insert a little bit of self-deprecating humor in there. We might say something like, our elevator is a little clunky sounding, but it's not usually out of order at all. Right. Or, it's true, our elevator was built, 10 years ago. Things ran a little bit slower, but it doesn't go out of order. So you can use a little bit of humor, but it's important to correct the record, because if you don't, then other people who come along and read that will assume it to be true. And that is why the break point of the A in SWARM, avoid a public fight, must occur after the correction, right? So this acronym should probably be SWRAM, but it's not. So you want to, if there's an error, you want to correct the record and then try and pull them offline, because if you don't, people will assume that it's just that way.
Yeah, I think I like your comment about addressing it. Like if they're just wrong, our elevator is fine. It's slow. It kind of takes a little bit off of you. Maybe they understand a little bit more. So yeah, I think that's an interesting. I love that photo too, so I had to show it on screen there. So
I use that in my keynote speeches, and she cringes every time, but I'm not taking it down. That's
yeah, I'm sure she's probably thinking, no one will ever see this, and then
that's right.
you put it on everything now. So anything else with right the wrong? Any other advice? Any easy ways to right the wrong that you've seen, or maybe bad ways that you've seen people try to attempt it?
The worst thing to do is just to not do it at all. And that's what I see most often, is people not correcting the record, people ignoring a comment. It's one thing to necessarily, maybe if you're flooded with a bunch of stuff, it's one thing to ignore. Shopping malls, this happens all the time, where people are just mad that the Wi-Fi speed is slow. We will still respond to those, but a lot of brands don't. And that's okay if you don't want to do that. But if you're saying the Wi-Fi is slow and it costs money, but it doesn't cost money, you have to go and correct that.
That's a good point there. All right, so we're going to move on to the last part of SWARM, and that's the end. And this is one that I think brands fail at a lot, but some brands do it really well, some don't. Is make friends. Now, we spoke like a human. We've gotten win-wins. We've avoided a public fight. We're righting the wrongs. How do you make friends with people who kind of at the moment don't like you a whole lot? because they're mad about something? How do you kind of switch that?
You hit it right on the head with the phrase "at the moment."
Right.
So there needs to be a little bit of time for this next step to happen. And this is the part of the swarm method which will work on the component of the objective, which is to convert them to brand advocates. So the first four are really trying to correct, trying to mitigate the negative response. This final step is the part that tries to move them over. And this can occur months later, by the way. So often what we will do is we will say, after we've sort of gone back and forth, hopefully this has been offline while this has been going on, we might ask if we can get back to them in a few months to see if they've noticed a change. So the case of the in the blog post, you'll see the example of the kiosk dude at the shopping mall that was just slathering skin cream on. So in our responses, we were saying, would it be okay with you if after a month or two, or actually I think it was a few weeks in that case, we get back to you and check up to make sure that it's gotten better. I cannot stress this enough. If you promise that, you should follow through with that. However, I'll say this. The simple fact that you have even taken that extra step immediately puts you in the top 1% of brands who care or don't care, right? It moves you into the, nobody else does that. Well, we do that for clients, but nobody does that, right? So it's like, this is really important to us that we get this right. So thank you for your feedback. I'm so sorry that happened. I'm going to raise this tomorrow morning on the operations team meeting. That's the specific action. That's the win. If you have anything else you'd like to add, please DM me here. Also, I'd like to follow up in a month or two to see if there's a bit of change. And the way you handle this can be very simple. In Agora Pulse, it's super easy. You just add like a label or a tag for that particular issue. If it's better access for wheelchairs, it's accessibility. If it's a restaurant, you might have a tag called gluten-free. If it's a patio, you might have a tag for patio or outdoor. If the website is too hard to understand, you might have a tag for website. And so you put people into those groupings, whether you use the labeling or the tag system that Agora Pulse has, whether you use your own system, whatever. Sometimes you could do it in email, just create a label in Gmail or, a folder. And then you follow up, you get back to them. So in the case of and we like to follow up with some kind of quantitative and qualitative measurement. So this might be getting too far into the weeds, but in the case of that dude who slathered on the skin cream, what we did was we said, we'd like to follow up with you. Would that be okay?
Right.
Some people responded yes, some people didn't. We followed up with them anyway, unless they specifically said, no, please don't. And we said, it's been a month or so. Here's the action that we took. By then we could report that we threatened, essentially that guy was threatened with being removed from the mall at that point, but he got removed later. I'd like to know what your feelings have been. Have you noticed a difference? And could you rank it on this scale? 1, it's gotten worse. 2, no difference. 3, it's gotten better. 4, it's much better. I feel much safer or whatever. Almost everyone, and by the way, very few people will get back to you. So just be aware of that. Don't expect it. If you're messaging, 50 people because of some big issue, you might expect 5 or 6 people to get back to you. So very few people will. But when they see that in the inbox, that reminds them, these people actually care. Someone actually made a point of following up. That is how you convert them over to brand advocacy. Plus that numbering system, not only do you have some qualitative information to provide to your boss or your client, you've also got a numbering system, right? You can say, here's what it used to be, here's what it is. There's been a 72% increase in positive sentiment. A lot of executives like numbers like that, so you can provide it with something as simple as that.
Yeah, I think it's I like that sentiment analysis side of it. Just kind of seeing where they're at. Maybe even, hey, here's what you're rating it then, and then, hey, you followed up. What do you rate it now? I mean, we all do that with apps. I know we have a sentiment analysis on a scale like 1 to 10. I forget what it's called. You do like the scale of 1 to 10. 8 or above is great. Everything else you wish you don't really want. You want at least that 8. So I think that's a good way to do it. And I think the key there you mentioned is figure out a way to follow up, and whether that's tagging them in something like Agora Pulse or like an emails, and I forget the app that I use, Boomerang. I think it's Boomerang.
Oh, Boomerang, great. Yeah.
I use Boomerang in Gmail, and I can send an email to somebody and then go into Boomerang before I even send the email, remind me to reply in 5 days, 7 days, whatever, and then it'll pop back up the top of my inbox in Gmail and say, it's been 7 days. Do you want to reply? And I can either dismiss it or go back in and reply. So there's ways for you to make sure you follow up, and that's going to be the key. Because if you tell somebody, I'm going to follow up with you in a month, and you don't, then you've gone back to the very beginning of this whole process.
Yeah.
You've got to start over, and you definitely need to make friends.
In the blog post that Deb has just kindly linked there, you'll see the actual email that I sent to people in the case of that kiosk vendor. Obviously with a couple of things redacted, but you can use that as a template if you wanted to. You'll also see one of the responses that we got back from someone who said, I appreciate this so much. Most establishments would shrug their shoulders, but your graciousness means a lot to me. That particular woman was one of the angriest at the beginning. And so she has moved through the sentiment funnel of addressing the issue and converting her to a brand advocate, which is the goal. And again, the goal is not just to shut people up. The goal is to convert them to someone who talks positively about your brand.
And I think that's crucial what you just said there. We're not just saying shut people up and delete their comments and move on and brush them off. Some people might do that through massive companies or politicians. I'll leave that one open for you. But you can't do that in most brands. You've got to figure out a way to make this thing right, to kind of right the ship, make them good customers, because everybody's watching. That's the thing. Everybody's watching this. And if you don't do it right, then it's just going to continue and get out of control. The worst thing I think is I'll see brands all the time not addressing their negative comments. And I'm like, what are you doing? You've got 50 negative comments right now and nobody's touching it for a week because they haven't even bothered to engage. I saw here recently on a restaurant here locally where I'm at, they just weren't monitoring it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you guys got to get in here. I messaged like, hey, you need help with community management? I know somebody. So I think you've got to do that because everybody, like you said, that swarm mentality comes in really, really fast, and you've got to definitely address it. So,
and even if you're not addressing specific kind of things, you can use the tagging. I mean, this is why a platform, and I'll just go back to Agora Pulse since, obviously they're your sponsor, but I mean, it's a good example of kind of using that kind of additional layer of a third-party tool, because you can add sentiment tags. So what we do with our clients is we will have 4 axes of sentiment: positive, negative, question, and neutral. Almost every comment gets one of those, and then a topic as well. So a topic would be, it's different for every client. Santa, oh my God, Santa at shopping centers, don't even get me started. If you want to ruin your life, Christmas, run social media comment management for Santa Claus. Santa, mall hours, COVID-19, and so on. And so that way, at the end of each month, you can provide your boss, your client, with a grid of saying, listen, negative comments about Santa have increased 35% year over year, right? You've got that kind of data. And because that's consolidated on a third-party tool, it's easy to kind of pop those things in.
Very cool. And Gregory says, great info. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Gregory, for watching along with us. Yeah, I think this is an interesting topic, and it's obviously we're covering it fast here, in a 30, 45-minute conversation. But I think there's so much you can learn, and we've put the link a few times in the comments. Hopefully you've gotten over to it. You can go kind of read it and dive into it. And I think you've got more options there to even get a little more information from you guys on how you do that. But before we let you go, I want to switch over. This is a different fun side of the show that Todd doesn't know about. What I call 5 questions. We're going to ask Todd 5 random questions out of a deck of cards. It's literally a deck of cards. From
I'm losing you. Sorry. I lost you on the video. I can't see you on the video.
Poddeck's actually a pretty cool thing about Poddeck. They just launched an iOS app. So you can do stuff on an app now too. I'm waiting for the Android one. But so I'm going to ask you 5 random questions. You can pass if it's too personal, perhaps.
Hit me.
And most of them, I don't think for you will be too personal. I've heard you talk. You'll answer anything, I think. All right. So question 1, 5 questions with Todd. Who'd play you in a movie?
Oh, God, I hope Brad Pitt would play me in a movie, but I don't think it would. You know who would probably play me in a movie? Is this guy named Ian, who was one of the winners of Big Brother, the reality TV show. Yeah. He's just this kind of nerdy guy that's kind of slightly evil. I don't think he's an actor, but I'd love for him to play me.
Good job. All right, question number 2, 5 questions. Which words or phrases do you most overuse?
Wow. I play a lot of Overwatch, the video game, which is a team-based shooter. So lately I've been yelling at my team a lot. I'm a healer, and so I'm usually yelling at Genji, who is one of the characters you can play. Genji's particularly irritating, so I'll often be yelling Genji, come over here for heels. I don't know. What do I would have to record myself and listen. I'm
You probably should
obviously
go back
not
and listen to
aware
your
of that.
podcast, and you'll probably figure out the word. Yeah.
Yeah, probably.
And we'll post a link to the podcast here again in a minute. All right. Question number 3, 5 questions with Todd Maffin. And I'm saying Maffin, correct, right? Or is it
Yeah, you got it. Yeah.
what's your guilty pleasure?
Oh, you know what? So incense. I love smells. Okay.
Okay.
So I've got like the Glades. I've got down here. I've got one of those plug-in, those plug-in smell makers. I've got it on a Wi-Fi Internet of Thing schedule, so that it's plugged into one of these devices. Ian Terry, thank you, Deb. So they turn on when I know that I'm going to be in different parts of the house. So it turns off in my office and then turns upstairs in the living room. And then an hour before we go to bed, it turns on in the bedroom. I have an incense problem, dude.
Well, they're all right. I saw you light one right before we got started.
I did. I have a problem. This, it's funny. This particular brand, I'm not going to plug them, but this particular brand is run by this crazy woman. Not literally crazy, but this is just bizarre woman. This is all she does. But she used to be a contractor in like the oil industry in Dubai and things like that. And then she pivoted and so she hand dips them, and they're amazing. And like 10 years ago, I said, I'll set up your Facebook page. Just send me like 10 packs of them. And so I'm still getting them.
That's hilarious. That's pretty cool. I like, doing diffusing the essential oils. I do that quite a bit too. So very similar.
Amateur.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's easy. Kids around, it's easy. All right. So, question number 4, 5 questions with Todd Maffin. When you die, what do you want to be remembered for? This one's deep. I
probably enabling people to tell their stories. I used to be, as I mentioned at the beginning, work in public radio, right. And the thing that warmed my heart the most was producing other people's stories. So they would come into the studio, they would write a bit, and by story, it could be their life story, it could be something that happened, blah, 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 or whatever. It's kind of a broad spectrum. And so I worked with them in telling their story in a fairly compelling way. Completely side note, here in British Columbia, we're having a provincial election, and I do a podcast series every election. The town that I live in is called Nanaimo, so it's called the Nanaimo Chronicles. Okay. And what I do is I go to the candidates and I sit down with them for long interviews, 2-3 hours long. And the only rule is no politics. You're not allowed to talk about politics. So we learn about their background, about their story. People don't know that candidates have children. One particular fellow took the opportunity of this particular podcast series to come out as LGBT. Nobody knew that about him before. So I think that's probably what I would want on my to be known as, is that I enabled people to tell their stories.
That's awesome. That's kind of my idea with asking these questions too. I get to know something about people that, you normally don't get to ask on a marketing podcast or a live show. So that's why I like asking these questions.
Yeah.
All right. So question number 5 questions with Todd Maffin. This one would be a fun one. If there was a sandwich named after you, what would be on it? What is the Todd Maffin special at Subway?
God, these are hard. Do you mean like what kind of foods do I like?
What would be on a sandwich? Like is it bologna? Is it cheese? Is it lettuce? Is it peanut butter?
Well, there'd be egg. It would be some kind of omelette-y kind of a thing. It would have to have some bacon. It would be like a breakfasty kind of sandwich. Okay. So yeah, so it would probably be a little bit of it would, actually I'll tell you exactly what it would be. It would be a homemade egg McMuffin. Ooh. I love egg McMuffin, so it would be a homemade version of that.
Well, there you go.
Or a croque monsieur, which some people may have to Google, but also a spectacular sandwich.
Well, very cool. I appreciate you letting us grill you there on those odd questions. If anyone wants to kind of find you, what's the best place to find you these days?
The podcast is probably easiest, which is todayindigital.com, or you can use your podcast app and just search for Today in Digital Marketing, or our company, which is engageq.com. I'm just Todd at engageq.com.
Very cool. Well, I appreciate you being on the show with us, and I look forward to maybe taking your 8-minute podcast and doing a bonus edition with you again.
Yeah.
And I hope everybody, the whole goal here, I hope everybody's watching and watches the replay. You apply this method that Todd's mentioned on how to engage negative comments and turn those into positives and make those people your fans and ambassadors. That's really the ultimate goal in the end, and the ultimate goal Todd has. So, Todd, I appreciate you being on the show with us. Stick around behind the scenes. I'll be right back with you, okay?
Thanks.
All right, and that's it for today's Social Media Lab. Remember, you can run over to agorapulselab.com, read all of our experiments that we've done in the past. And we have a group, if you didn't know it, you can run over to it's a private Facebook group too, socialmedialab.group. We'll take you right over to it, or just search for Social Media Lab Community if you want to do that on Facebook. We talk about different things. I'm always asking everybody different questions, and it's private. The nice thing about a private group is no one, your friends, your family aren't going to see you commenting on that. They have to actually be in there. That's why I like a private group. So make sure you go join that. And then next week on the show, I have my old friend, Casey Zeman. We're going to talk. I've known Casey, 10 years, I think, in social media. And one of the first guys I ever met in internet marketing. And so we're going to talk about Easy Webinar, platform that he runs and a company he runs. So make sure you join us next week here on the Social Media Lab Live. See ya.